Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on what would have been our Enter the Vortex concert this Monday, March 23rd. We are very disappointed, of course, not to be able to present this program to you live, but we are currently happy and safe and healthy and hope that you are happy, safe, and healthy as well. We will get through this all together.
This gives us an opportunity, actually, to be able to present our performance of Charles Wuorinen's New York Notes, the archival recording and footage of it from our performance in April of 2017, which was an incredible performance, one of our most notable ones from our short time so far as an ensemble. But it was the end of our first season. And it's particularly fitting right now because last week we actually lost the great Charles Wuorinen. He had a bad fall in September of 2019 and had been struggling to regain his footing and regain his health, but ultimately lost that battle last week. He was a composer that was really close to my heart musically. I really loved Charles's work and got to meet him a few times, actually, and work with him in a number of different settings. This is an incredible piece, and we're really excited that we can share it with you instead of performing Grisey and Hurrell, which is a huge disappointment. Those were two pieces that we were really looking forward to, particularly the way they were paired together. But anyway, once this is all calmed down, our plan is to present them, reschedule them for next season. So they're not going to go away entirely. They're just on hold, but we're really excited to be able to have the opportunity to share this performance with you instead.
As George mentioned, Charles Wuorinen's music has had a profound impact on both of our musical lives. We've been lucky to perform a number of his works over the years, from spin-off to Janissary music, and finally to ensemblenewSRQ's presentation of New York Notes. So George, can you tell us a little bit more about the impact that Charles's music has had on your life?
So I was first exposed to the music of Wuorinen. I had never heard of him until I was playing in a group in Boston in undergrad called the Xanthos Ensemble. And one of the pieces that came along was put in my little box was this piece, New York Notes, the percussion part, which was, for me, this thing I had never seen or imagined before. This incredibly inventive writing, very demanding, very virtuosic, but at the same time really human at the same time, which was what surprised me about it. We performed this piece in New York, and it was great fun, and I didn't think too much of it, and Wuorinen himself, but I loved the piece. And it wasn't until I was in my graduate studies at the Juilliard School that I was talking with my teacher, Dan Druckmann, about pieces to play on a recital, what I should do for my big graduating recital at Juilliard, this big daunting blank slate in front of me. And he mentioned that, there's this piece by Charles Wuorinen, whose name I now knew from having played New York Notes once a few years before. And he said, it's this piece called Janissary music. It's for solo percussion. It was written in the 60s, but nobody plays it. And I thought, that's odd. What do you mean nobody plays it? He says, well, it's so difficult, and it's such a big setup, and it's so kind of onerous and such a large undertaking that it's almost never performed. And so I naturally took that as an immediate challenge that needed to be explored and found out. And I played this work on my graduate recital. I learned it. It took a few months to really put everything together and get it in a good place. But in final preparations for my recital, about a week before, I played it for my teacher, for Dan Druckmann, who is a close friend of Charles Wuorinen's, and they kind of grew up and existed in this same part of New York City and the same compositional kind of community. Charles Wuorinen would have known Dan Druckmann's father, Jacob Druckmann, really well, and of course Dan is close with Charles and the whole crew. Dan asked Charles to come watch me play Janissary music at my recital, which was, this unbelievable honor, something that was unexpected. I didn't expect, the composer of this piece, who wrote this piece in the 60s, to show up at my recital. Actually, Charles came a few hours before. I played it for him, and he was extremely gracious. He loved the performance, and it was there that we also performed his work Spin-Off, his trio for Samantha was playing violin. Our very good friend and member of A Far Cry, Carl Doty, was playing bass, and I was playing congas, which is this fascinating trio that he's put together. We played both the works for him, and he was incredibly gracious and very appreciative of us performing for him. It was a lot of fun.
George, you later recorded Janissary music, and I think it was probably one of the most important recording projects you've undertaken in a solo capacity. So tell us a little bit more about that and the challenges that it presented. I know setting it up, number one, was a big undertaking in and of itself, and also required you to memorize everything because there was no place really in the whole 360 degrees that you were playing to really put the music.
Yeah, so as a result of Charles Wuorinen coming to my recital and seeing me play Janissary music, he very much enjoyed the performance and my take on it, and actually asked me to record it for a CD release that they had with Albany Records coming out. It's on a CD called Metagong, which is a 2-piano, 2-percussion piece that he wrote that my teacher Dan Druckmann was on, and Jim Baker, amongst other people. But it was this number one kind of overwhelming request. You know, the composer asks you to play this rather famous piece, you know, with him there in the booth at the recording session. And we had a fantastic producer, Judy Sherman, on the project, and it was just this unbelievable experience and this opportunity to be given. So there are a number of logistical issues, as you'll see in the short video clip we're going to show right after this. It's kind of a 360-degree surround sound, but percussion instruments, if you will. And that makes a number of challenges even more severe. You have the fact that you can usually rehearse on one set of instruments, but then often, if the recording session is in a different place, you can't take an entire truckload of instruments and bring them to the place where the recording session is happening in New York City necessarily. So we had to rent other gear. So it was a matter of getting used to slightly different instruments. I actually brought a large rug with me that had taped down spiked spots for every instrument, because often I would have to be reaching behind me, and if something was 1 or 2 inches to the right or the left, I would be hitting the wrong instrument or the wrong drum. So I needed to make sure that my location for a lot of this stuff was the same and all the other instruments were the same. Then there was kind of the issue of miking it and trying to get it all done in one day. We did it at the Academy of Arts and Letters on 155th Street on the Upper West Side. And it's this very cool old wooden building in there. But I remember it was the middle of the summer. We had the AC turned. There was no AC, I don't think, at the time. I think they're just installing that these days. But there was no AC, so it was warm in there. And then Charles and Judy were in the booth, and they were able to communicate with me through a talkback mic. And it was a really, really incredibly demanding recording session, actually. I mean, it's a difficult piece to get through. And it's kind of, when you start it, it's about a 12-minute piece in 2 parts. You start it and you get to the end, and various things happen in between, but you're just happy to be at the end. It's kind of one of those pieces where you kind of take a step back and you go, okay, I made it. Complicating factors was that they would stop every so often and say they both knew the piece really, really well, and they would make a request like, for example, hey, measure 27, we need to do that again. You hit the 3rd bongo instead of the 2nd bongo. Or, you know,
classic
the 4th
mistake.
drum. Classic mistake. 3rd bongo instead of the 2nd bongo. But it was a huge challenge. It was one, I mean, I remember it being super fun, an incredible experience. This was in 2014, the summer of 2014. But I remember it just being kind of a blur. We did it in 6 hours, and the quality of the recording that Judy Sherman got out of it is just unbelievable. Every time I listen back to it, it sounds better than I remember it in person. It was great. One of the other great performances I remember was the premiere of Charles's cantata that he wrote called It Happens Like This. Mm-hmm. And that was at Tanglewood in Ozawa Hall, and Charles was conducting the work. And it was this incredible experience to actually work with the composer as he's really kind of workshopping everything and trying everything out with singers. What was remarkable actually was how little needed to be changed in the process. You know, I've done a lot of premieres over the years and a lot of newer works where, you know, composers try things out and, okay, this needs to be adjusted, or I thought this was going to work, but this didn't really work. With Wuorinen, it was what was on the page was pretty much what we did from start to end. There were some balance things, a few very small revisions or dynamic changes, but really what his vision was in his head was totally ready for the small orchestra that it was. That work was inspired by the poetry of James Tate.
It happens like this. I was outside St. Cecilia's rectory, smoking a cigarette, when a goat appeared beside me. It was mostly black and white, with a little reddish-brown here and there. When I started to walk away, it followed. I was amused and delighted, but wondered what the laws were on this kind of thing. There's a leash law for dogs, but what about goats? People smiled at me and admired the goat. It's not my goat, I explained. It's the town's goat. I'm just taking my turn caring for it. I didn't know we had a goat, one of them said. I wonder when my turn is. Soon, I said. Be patient, your time is coming. The goat stayed by my side. It stopped when I stopped. It looked up at me and I stared into its eyes. I felt he knew everything essential about me. We walked on. A policeman on his beat looked us over. That's a mighty fine goat you got there, he said, stopping to admire. It's the town's goat, I said. His family goes back 300 years with us, I said, from the beginning. The officer leaned forward to touch him, then stopped and looked up at me. Mind if I pat him? He asked. Touching this goat will change your life, I said. It's your decision. He thought real hard for a minute and then stood up and said, What's his name? He's called the Prince of Peace, I said. God, this town is like a fairy tale. Everywhere you turn there's mystery and wonder, and I'm just a child playing cops and robbers forever. Please forgive me if I cry. We forgive you, officer, I said, and we understand why you, more than anyone, should never touch the prince. The goat and I walked on. It was getting dark, and we were beginning to wonder where we would spend the night. For myself, practicing Wuorinen has the effect of cleaning everything up. It's incredibly therapeutic in a musical and technical sense. It's like doing musical math because everything has an answer, and everything is so clear and so precise. But in that precision, there's so much empathy and expression. There's also sort of this sense of kinetic energy under the surface of almost everything he writes. Sometimes it comes out of the texture more. You can sense the skeleton sort of peeking out through the music, and other times it's more disguised, but it's always there. So when we knew we wanted to do New York Notes for an ensemble concert, it was a really great way for us to kind of initially bring together a lot of people who made the ensemble possible in terms of our inspiration from working with friends and other musical influences over the years. And it was a really great way to kind of bring everyone to Sarasota to sort of introduce them, people who have now since become regular players in terms of guests that we bring down to the ensemble.
But you were talking about getting people down here, and getting people down here now, you know, these days is completely impossible. Yes. But kind of a little hint of that, the difficulty was Sam Budish trying to get here for the first rehearsals of New York Notes from New York. It was April of 2017, and there were some really weird weather patterns going on in New York. And
Atlanta. There was some sort of weather thing.
It was just one of those days where there was weather everywhere. But Sam could not get his direct flight the day before the rehearsal from LaGuardia to Sarasota. So we convinced him to try to just at least make it to Atlanta. And that night he landed in Atlanta at like midnight the night before our rehearsal, which was at 10 a.m. And he bravely got in a rental car at midnight and drove from Atlanta to Sarasota. And I remember here at the house looking out on the front yard, we were tuning, getting ready, and Sam Budish in a rental car pulls up to the lawn and like stumbles out of the car, walks across the lawn, comes inside and sits down.
Takes out his timpani mallets.
Takes out his mallets and gets ready to play the rehearsal in a slightly disheveled but but all together in one piece. It was
Yes.
a kind of an auspicious beginning to the week in terms of travel logistics, but Budish made it, and it's one of the most heroic and triumphant entrances to a rehearsal that has been seen by anyone. It was funny. But then the rest of the week went off really well without a hitch, and the performance, as you will see right now,
Momentarily.
is really fantastic. It was unbelievably fun, and we can't wait to revisit this piece. We hope you enjoy. Thanks a lot.
thanks again, everyone, so much for joining us. We have a few more thanks that we want to leave you with. Our board of directors and Taylor have been incredibly helpful always, but especially during this time of uncertainty. And we are so appreciative of them. And we would also like to, of course, thank our musicians for all the hard work and dedication they put into every concert, this performance, of course, being one of those times. We also would just like to thank Greg Chestnut and First Congregational Church for being our Sarasota home, for allowing us the great space to present these concerts. And we also finally would just like to offer our deepest thanks to Charles for all the great music.
Thanks, everyone. We would normally finish our concerts with a reception. We're not allowed to receptize anymore, at least in this current climate, but our social distancing reception will be happening. We're going to go over to Instagram and be on IGTV Live, maybe having just a glass of wine, relaxing, sharing some stories, hopefully with you all. Whoever can join us, jump over to Instagram. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Am I doing that with my mouth? God.
This should be in there.
Oh, boy.
This is what it's actually like.